Well, here's my sketch, and as you can see, it's fairly loose, but the main details are there. The main values are there as well, so that's important. So I'll try to replicate the detail as well as some of the values. Now, it's kind of hard to do with this pen. This pen is filled with golden acrylics, high flow acrylics, and this particular color is called indigo blue. It used to be called anthracnone blue, and I think indigo blue is a better name. It's an odd kind of a blue. It's got a lot of covering power, as you can see there, but it can be also very transparent, and it's kind of hard to describe. It has a little bit of grayness to it. It isn't quite as high chroma as phthalo blue, for example, but I really like it a lot. This is the first time I've ever used this color actually for an underpainting, so it'll be a bit of an experiment. Now, one thing I might have done differently is I might have put a wash of indigo blue over the whole thing after I got the drawing in. Now, that line I just put on the top of the bush there has a lot of variety to it, and I really like it a lot. Now, as the painting goes along, I start putting the paint in, and I lose some of that variety. So you have to kind of be careful that you don't lose some of the really important detail in your sketch. So this pen really can scrub the color on really quite nicely. You can just use a corner of it and you can get a very thin stroke. So it's really nice. I love these pens. And the golden high flow acrylics, they're very good. It's almost like an ink. I mean, it's so thin, it's amazing. And yet, you can see it's covering quite nicely too. So I'm still, just looking at my sketch, trying to get all the important detail, and if I can, actually make the sketch look better. So I'm really asking a lot of questions as I'm sketching. I'm trying to use the sketch as a point of departure for an even better sketch on my canvas. So that's the goal, and sometimes you hit it and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you'll make a decision to include a detail that was maybe not that important, or created some kind of a focal point or something that sort of detracted from your original vision, so you have to kind of go back in and change that. But now you can see I can use that pen just very lightly, and it sort of gives a very dry brush effect. So it's these things are great. I mean, there's a great invention, whoever came up with them. So I'm just kind of adding, detail here and there, adjusting the value just slightly. If you have a nice sketch, you can get a good sketch on your canvas, and you try to use each phase of the painting process as a way to leverage the next layer. You might say that each phase of the painting is inspiration for the next phase. So you don't want to scrimp at any point. You don't want to say, that's good enough. Now, I did radically change these reflecting lines. These are where the water might be moving a little bit faster or something, or there might be some wind hitting it, and it'll be sort of making little ripples, and it'll pick up the sky color. But I sort of decided that they were a little bit too stylized, and that I needed to go with a more naturalistic looking ripple effect. I like to stylize when I can, but sometimes it just looks a little too stylized, and you need to get something a little more realistic. So what I did was I just got on the internet and I looked at some photos of water. I mean, I didn't copy it. I just sort of used it as inspiration. So, the one thing I would like to point out is this is primarily a sketch that I've done from memory. I've seen similar scenes to this, and I'm simply making a composite drawing based on a lot of different memories I've had of being on the water. I love being on the water, and I take a lot of sketches and photos when possible. And so primarily this is from memory. This is kind of a project I've been involved in just recently, is trying to get more of a stylization into a sketch by relying on my memory. If I'm looking at a photo, sometimes I'm bogged down into, at least design-wise, into some unimportant detail. So I will, use photographs to bring in some of the surface detail, you might say. Now here's some of my color I'm using. I'm using titanium white, cadmium yellow deep, and cadmium orange deep. Now here's some other colors I'm adding to my palette. And these are nickel titanate yellow, cadmium red light, and ultramarine blue. So those are some nice colors. And then here I'm using dioxazine purple and quinacridone violet. Those are going to be great to mix with my greens, and the purple also is a very deep color. Now here's my palette all laid out, and I've added a few extras. There's some titanium buff. It's kind of an off-white. And I also added some phthalo blue, which I'm using right now. I've also added some quin red. I also have some cobalt green there, and that's a great color. So I've had to, I've kind of rounded out my palette. So there I'm mixing some titanium white and some nickel titanate yellow, and adding just a little bit of red in there to kind of warm that up a little bit. And adding some white to lighten it up a little bit. So I'm obviously running out of titanium white here pretty quick, but I'll stop and refresh that palette. So in this, I'm not going to be using a lot of palette knife with my left hand in this video, because obviously I want to hold the palette up so that everyone can see it. But it is something I do, and I will use the palette knife a little bit later on. But I just wanted everybody to see the colors I'm mixing. Now I'm mixing up some color, believe it or not, for the sky, and I mixed some titanium white and some phthalo blue to get that. But I was mixing up the pink and the yellow to mix into this blue, this base of blue. There's just a little bit of ultramarine blue in this as well. I like to keep the colors, you can see right now I'm using the palette knife, and I'm trying to keep the colors pretty unmixed. There's a little bit of that pink color in there, and I just kind of mix that in, squish it down, and push out some of the blue that was on my palette knife. So if you add, if a sky is just blue, it looks really dead and flat, so you have to add quite a bit of pink in it, really. And some yellows are nice too. You can get a little bit of vibrational thing going with some greens and pinks. Now here's basically white and dioxazine purple. I want to kind of set that tone. I want to get that really dark note in there. And dioxazine purple is probably about the darkest color on my palette. And it's actually the darkest color I have, actually. So it's a nice color to kind of... Now there's some cobalt green, and it's a great green. You can tell I love it because it's almost gone, but I have enough for this painting. And you can mix it too. It's not like if you run out you can't mix it, but it's a very cool green, and it looks really fantastic with this purple. I also found the titanium, or the titanate, the nickel titanate yellow is a new color, and I hadn't really used it before, and it goes really well with that cobalt green too. I really loved it a lot. So those are kind of the three base colors for my greens, and I'll kind of just continue to fill in that purple. Now there I've got a little bit of that cobalt green mixed in with the purple, and I'm just starting to mix a little bit with the palette knife. So I'm keeping a lot of the colors on my palette knife as I go from one color to another. I don't, clean it off with a tissue. So I'm just kind of skimming those across the top of that wet paint there, and it works really pretty good. You can start to see there's some value modification that's very slight. There I've mixed some of the nickel titanate yellow in there, and I also have some cadmium yellow deep, and I think I'm putting some in there too. I also have a little bit of yellow ochre. There's the color. Now I'm mixing some red, and that's just cad red. And I just want to warm that deeper shadow of the bush that's closer. So you want to have the bush that's closer be a warmer color than the tree in the back, obviously, and that will give you a sense of depth and dimension. Now you can use cool colors in the foreground, but it's going to take a little bit more finesse. So I do put some color, some blues into that later in this process, but I'm picking up a lot of the yellows and putting them in here. Yeah, now I've got a little bit of the cadmium yellow deep. There's some of the nickel titanate yellow mixing in there. Really loving that. The nickel titanate yellow is a very light value yellow, and so it has the effect almost of you could do this if you don't have this color. You can just use cadmium yellow light and mix in white with it, and the white will cool down the yellow, and it keeps it from getting too hot. Sometimes when I add yellows in, they'll get too hot, and it's just not really good. And I'm picking up some. I started to pick up some ultramarine blue, then shifted over to the phthalo blue, and that's a nice choice because you want to get a lot of complexity in your color. And picked up some purple too. And that purple, it just really looks great in that green. Now the reason that purple looks so great in a green is because it's got red in it. So it cools it down, but it also neutralizes. So if you just added pure purple like a phthalo or ultramarine blue, that green would be really high chroma and it would start to look very ugly. And that's one of the problems that many people make especially when they're starting to paint or when you're outside, is you just make your colors too high chroma. And I'm guilty of that myself at times, because you see that high chroma green and you just want it to be high chroma, and when you put it on in paint, it just screams and it doesn't look right. It looks kind of garish. So use a lot of red in your greens and you won't have that problem.